Welcome back to Sailing El Jaleo. Now that the ever so tedious 2025 ICW debrief has been completed, I think that was about 2.5 to 3 hours over the last 4 weeks. So yeah, it was quite a data dump. So I hope it's useful to someone. But this week we're going to move on to something much more enjoyable and hopefully will appeal to a broader audience. And I'm going to try and keep this one as short as humanly possible. But I do tend to get off topic from time to time. So this week we're going to talk about one of my absolute favorite weeks of the year, and that is, it's actually only about 2 or 3 days that I spread it over, but it's all of my pickling for the year. So I do take a lot of my own pickled products with on the boat. I've always felt that it's cheaper to make my own, and I can control all of the ingredients that go into it, which I like. And this year I actually did an experiment. I tracked the cost of everything that I purchased, and I compared it to a comparable product if I would have bought it in the store, just to see if it's cheaper to do your own pickling or if it is in fact cheaper to buy it at a store. So one of the things that I love about pickling is, you know, in today's world everything is so darn polarized. You can't even say anything. You have to worry about everything you say, whether how it's going to be taken, who you're going to piss off. It's an exhausting world that we live in. But thankfully there are a few things that we can talk about, no matter in this the politically war-torn country. There are still a few things you can talk about, and you don't really have to worry about drawing the ire of anyone. And one of those things is sailing, which is absolutely wonderful. Everyone that I've ever met on the water, you meet that person on a level of your love of what you're doing, and different types of people can get together and chat, and it's absolutely wonderful. And another thing that I think that actually can bridge the divide between both left and right and everyone in between is creating your own food. I think it's becoming very apparent. You know, I worked in the food industry for a number of years, and I think it's very apparent to the majority of the American population that something has gone horribly wrong with our food supply and the way that we eat and the foods that we consume. I think it's becoming pretty obvious that it is a real problem. So one of the great things about pickling, it does appeal to my nature because it's very meticulous. It's very kind of formula oriented, but you can also create your own stuff. Like you can make your own blends, you can make your own mixes, you can tweak, you know, the foods however you like it, and that is an absolute wonderful aspect of it. So it appeals to my OCD, my regimented complex, as well as my I'm going to do it my own way complex. So it's a very enjoyable endeavor. If you've never tried it, it is super easy. I'll just run through it real quick. The basic procedure is you have this big water bath, and this works for, I'm talking specifically about pickling. Now, if you're doing canning, there are a couple of extra steps. You have to adjust pH for some things, but I don't get into canning. I just do pickling. It's safer, it's easier, it's faster, and I love acidic foods. I love vinegar-based foods, so it's easy for me to do. If you're looking for more information on canning, this probably is not going to be very useful. The basics are the same. There's just some tweaks that you have to do for canning. So basically you take your jar and you put it in a water bath that's boiling, and you boil the jar for 10 minutes to 15 minutes to sterilize it, you know, after you've cleaned it, of course. So then you take it out and you fill it with whatever product you are putting in there. And there are two different ways to do it. You can either dry pack or you can wet pack, and I do some both ways. I'll get into that in a little bit. So then you take your product that is now in the jar, and you do have to leave a headspace in there. So, you know, from the neck of the jar up to the top, you want to leave about 3/4 of an inch of air in there, and you need that in there in order for the jars to seal, and that means they'll be preserved. So once you have your product in the jar, you put the lid on, you screw down your little ring, and you want to screw it down pretty snug, but not like super tight, because a little bit of air is going to escape out of there. And then you put your jar back in your water bath, and you process it for another 15 minutes. So once the water gets up to a boil, you boil it for 15 minutes, take it out, and as the jar begins to cool down, you'll hear that little lid pop, and there's a little, most of them, there are different types of lids, but most of them have a little raised dimple in the center. I don't know how, yeah, I'm not going to get into that. But there's a little raised dimple in the center, and you'll just hear it pop down, and then you can take your ring off. Now, you never want to store your jars with the rings on. Once the lid has popped and sealed, you can take that ring off. And it's good to store them without the ring, because sometimes a seal can break, and if you have the ring on there, it can look like it hasn't, or if you have temperature swings, it can potentially reseal, and you just don't want to expose yourself to the potential for eating spoiled food. So if you take the ring off, if the seal breaks for whatever reason, it will be very apparent and you'll know it. Now, between wet packing and dry packing, there are products like, I do corn chow chow. That's one of my favorite things to do. I have the most jars of that. And most people have never heard of chow chow. I think it might be a Midwestern thing or a Scandinavian thing, both of which are a part of me. But anyway, so corn chow chow is, you can make it however you want, but primarily it's corn, onions, and that kind of stuff. So I'll do corn. I'll cut it off the cob. I'll buy it fresh. Cut it off the cob. I add onions, so it's corn, onions, peppers, and garlic. So I always do that as a wet pack, and what that means is I'll put all of my vegetables that I'm going to pickle into a 5-quart pot on the stove, and I'll actually put my pickling liquid right into it, and I'll bring it up to a simmer, and I'll let it simmer for 10 minutes prior to putting it into the jars and then processing it in the water bath. Now, the reason I do that is just because corn fibers are a little tough, and it's good to get a little extra cook time on those. And also, when you're making your pickling solution, there are certain items like onions that have a lot of natural waters in them. Peppers have, and corn both. Corn, it has a lot of water in it. So normally in a pickling brine, you have vinegar, water, sugar, and salt. It's very simple to make. So when I'm doing something like a corn chow chow where there's a huge natural water content inside the vegetables, I won't put any water in. So I make it a little bit stronger than perhaps what it has to be, but I really like acidic foods, and I just really enjoy the way that tastes. Now, I've tried to use different stuff. I've tried to use white vinegar versus red wine vinegar, and I've never noticed a difference between the two. So, and I also use, instead of using sugar, I use agave nectar. There again, I don't really think it makes a difference. I just feel hoity-toity doing that, you know. I just pat myself on the back a little bit when I use that instead of sugar. So there again, I don't think it makes a difference. And so that's the basic process for wet packing. Now, for dry packing, I do dry pack a lot of stuff too. All of my pepper rings, my pepper mashes, and my beets, I will dry pack the beets. So basically what you do there is you put the product in the jar. So I'll take my beets, I'll cube them up. Now, I don't cook the beets beforehand. The beets will get cooked while they're being processed. So I don't cook them beforehand because I like to have a little bit of bite on my beet. You know, they can get a little bit mushy, but I like to have some bite. Now, I did make some carrots as well. I dry packed those. I did not cook those beforehand either because I like to have a little bit of bite on them as well. And peppers, pickles, that kind of stuff, if you try and wet pack those, they'll just turn to mush. So you really can't do that. Now, if you are dry packing, something like a beet, you really can't compress just because it's a really dense vegetable. But if it's something like, you know, jalapeno pepper rings, you really want to mash them down in the jar as hard as you can, because they'll actually shrink a little bit while you're processing them after they've been jarred. So you want to try and pack that jar as full as possible. You do still have to leave that head space in the jar, but in this case, once you've got your vegetable in the jar, you'll actually prepare your pickling solution on the stove. You'll just bring it up to a boil, make sure all your salt and sugar's dissolved, and then you'll actually pour it into the jar. And then from there, the jars go back into the water bath and you process them. So that's the basic difference between wet packing and dry packing. Depending upon the vegetable, you know, you can experiment, find out which way you like it. I know, you know, for beets, most people do wet process those. So I do them dry just because I like them to have a little more crunch or a little toothier bite to them. So it's all a personal thing. You can experiment. Hey, even this year I did stuff differently. I did some jars where I tried some red wine vinegar just to see if that, you know, would make some stuff a little tangier. I don't know. You know, it's all an experiment. So, you know, you can do whatever you want and see what works for you. So, you know, a lot of people are, you know, so I make a ton of corn chow chow. I have a list here, and I don't think most people, you know, I explained what's in it, but you'd say, this year I made 58 jars of it. And you'd be like, well, what in the hell do you use 58 jars of corn chow chow for? It's not like you eat it like kernel corn. I actually use it, you know, in a sailboat, sometimes it's hard to get fresh meats, fresh vegetables, that kind of stuff, especially if you live like I do at anchor all the time. And, you know, we don't get to grocery stores but a handful of times a year. So we do rely on a lot of canned stuff, and I do like canned tuna a lot. I get is it yellowtail or yellowfin? I think it's yellowtail. So I like yellowtail tuna. Maybe it is yellowfin, whatever it is. But I make a lot of wraps. You know, wraps are great because those tortillas last forever. They're literally, you can bring 4 bundles of them and they're good for 2 months, you know. So that's really great as compared to bread. And in a wrap, I'll throw in a little lettuce, some of that corn chow chow, some pickled beets, a can of tuna, and a little bit of Caesar dressing, and it is wonderful. You get, you know, the salt from the sardines and the Caesar dressing. You get the pop from the beets, and then the acidity and, you know, the garlicness from the corn chow chow. It's just a wonderful, wonderful. I eat those, you know, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 times a week, and they're easy to make. They're quick. You know, if you're up sailing and you want something quick to eat, it's just a wonderful thing. So that's, you know, what I use a lot of this stuff for, is just for quick meals. So last year I took between 55 and 60 jars total of stuff, and I was out of my pickled stuff by January. So this year I wanted to take between 100 and 110 jars of stuff, and I kept track of everything. So this is what I used to make all this stuff. Now, there is some stuff that I did take out of my mother's garden, some peppers. So I do have jars of pepper mash that I'll use on like sandwiches, and if I make spaghetti, I always dress that up. I'll add in my Italian herbs, my pepper mash, and some garlic. You know, spaghetti sauce from the store, it doesn't matter what you buy, it all tastes like crap, so you got to dress it up. So I'm not going to include in either the cost or in the product that I produced. I'm not going to count anything that came out of my mom's garden. I'm just going to include what I bought at the store, so you can do a comparison. You know, does it make sense to pickle your own stuff? Now, if we're talking about a jar of pickles, it probably doesn't make sense. You can go down to the store and get a jar of pickles for what, $2-3? It's probably not gonna pay for you to put the time and energy into pickling your own stuff. But if it's something like a can of, or a jar of corn relish or corn chow chow, which can cost $12, then it certainly does make sense to make it yourself. So this is what went into what I made this year. So I bought 80 ears of corn. I did also pickle some tomatillos. Now, I have never tried that before, but I've heard they're good, so I did add some tomatillos this year. So 80 ears of corn, 4 pounds of tomatillos, 5 pounds of carrots, 2 pounds of habaneros, 6 pounds of jalapenos, 3 pounds of poblanos, 15 pounds of beets, 8 pounds of onions, 5 pounds of garlic, and all of that together cost $94.50. So that's pretty cheap for all of that, all of those vegetables. Then for hard goods, I did buy, or dry, or whatever, you know, not vegetable stuff. I did buy 2 gallons of apple cider vinegar, 2 gallons of white vinegar, 2 cups of red wine vinegar, salt, agave nectar. That was $32.46. I already had the jars, so the lids were $14.50. I did actually, you know, I did buy 3 more flats of jars this year to boost it up to boost up my jar count. But a good rule of thumb is you can get a jar and a lid. Now, I did have to buy lids for the jars that I'm reusing, the 50 jars from last year. But I did buy more jars this year, so jars are about $1 a piece. Just for reference there. So that total was $141.46. Now that should probably be about 12, 24, 36, around $36 higher because I did buy 36 new jars. So that brings it up to about $175 that I spent this year. So the total that I produced, I did produce 58 jars of corn relish, 24 jars of pickled beets, 5 jars of pickled garlic, 3 jars of tomatillos, 3 jars of carrots, and 5 jars of habaneros. So that is everything that I got out of it. And if I had bought all of that stuff in the store, it would have cost $795. So on a $175 investment, getting $795 worth of product out of it is a pretty good return. Now, I didn't include, obviously some fuel cost went into that for processing the jars. I didn't include that. That's probably about the only other expense that I didn't include. So, of course, my time, that's how much per hour am I worth? Not a lot. So that is pickling. It's one of my favorite. I love it. I love pickling. I love processing my own food. I can control the ingredients. I can make my own creations. I can tune them exactly how I want them. And it's just, I love it. It's one of my favorite weeks of the year. Start of the NFL season, start of the Formula One season, our NFL fantasy football draft, and pickling. Those are some of the weeks that I look forward to the most in the year. So this was a great time. And I see we're already up to like 16 minutes, so let's get the heck out of here. This one's too long already. So I hope you all are well, and we'll see you next week. And that's all we have time for this week. I would like to give a massive shout out to my Patreon crew. Without your guys' support, I wouldn't make these videos. And my Patreon crew is Joan and Juddy Judnick, Val and Chris Alcorn, Denise and Eli Sackett, Sherry Erickson, Deb Shaw, Matthew Spotton, Peter Allen, and Natalie Linehan. Thank you guys so very much. Your support really means the world to me. I do have one legacy patron member, and her name is Joan Linbo. Unfortunately, she has passed on, but she lives on in our hearts forever. We really miss you, Joan. If you are interested in joining our Patreon crew, there is a link in the description down below, and that'll take you to our Patreon page where you can sign up. And there are hundreds, literally hundreds of extra videos and photos of our travels, and I try and keep everything there up to date and post at least once or twice a week, so it gives you a little peek behind the curtain. If you do like our videos, please like, comment, and subscribe. That'll help us out more than you'll ever know, and that actually doesn't cost you anything, so hit that like button. Alrighty, I hope you all are well, and we'll see you next week.